Welcome, everyone, to our 1 hour panel discussion where we will speak with our wonderful panelists on the topic of how minority female athletes overcome obstacles. This discussion today is to celebrate International Women's Day and as we're sitting here in Women's History Month. So we'll be hearing from each of our panelists, answering various questions. But really what we want to know is how our women and the message they have to share with you on International Women's Day.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brenda Villa. I'm a 4-time Olympic medalist in the sport of water polo. And I'm really honored to be part of this panel today. I would say, underrepresented athlete in the sport of water polo as a first-generation Mexican American. And I also played on the boys high school team. So there are many experiences where I was either the first to do something or I was a part of a group that wasn't represented in the sport that I was a part of. So I think discussions like these are really important. I attended Stanford University and I grew up in Commerce, California, which is in Southeast Los Angeles.
Hello, my name is Chinny Nwagbo. I am the current director here at Peace Players Baltimore. Prior to this role, I started playing basketball around 14 years old and was able to go to Syracuse University. And from then, went and played professionally all over the world, playing 6 years in Spain, a year in Portugal, 3 years in Poland, playing the World Championship Games in Brazil, the South American Championship Games in Chile, and finalizing my career playing in Israel. In 2016, I came back home and I was able to work in the capacity of a youth development specialist and coach with the NBA, with various NBA teams. While I was doing that, I had the opportunity to become a sports envoy with the Department of State, which is amazing experience. Basically, what I do is I travel all over the world and I work with different U.S. embassies, and it's brought me here. Now I sit as the director of Peace Players. We use the power of sport to unite divided communities. We were started in 2001 in South Africa under the premise that if we can play together, we can live together. We are in the Middle East, Northern Ireland, and Cyprus, and in the U.S. we are in LA, Chicago, Detroit, Brooklyn, and Baltimore. So I'm so excited to continue on using sports for social good and to continue to use my platform to lift up those youth coming behind me. So I'm excited about today. Woo-hoo!
Hi, my name is Lakshmi Fururi. I'm a second-generation Indian American. I was also a tennis player back in the 80s and 90s. I started playing tennis when I was about 5 years old. I started taking lessons with my family in a small town called Merced, California. Both of my parents are physicians, so they came here in the 70s during the Indian physician wave. And my father always wanted his kids to play sports because in India, a lot of people did not have the opportunity to do so. About 2 years into playing tennis and other sports as well, the coach in Merced thought I had some talent and basically told my parents that I should move to an area where I could develop it. And so for that, as well as their work, we moved to Southern California, and we moved to a small town called Claremont, California, which is home of the Claremont Colleges and Pomona College, well known now. And I grew up in a club called the Claremont Tennis Club. And I started playing every day with my brother. I credit him a lot for my development because he was the only person I could really play with. And he had some friends that came along and they were also very good. So I basically grew up with a bunch of boys, playing with a bunch of boys, and that helped me tremendously. And I started playing tournaments and national tournaments around age 10, 11, and just started winning, I guess. And, one thing led to another, and I got to play my first US Open when I was coming into my junior year of high school. So that was kind of really exciting and scary. It's been a privilege to play some of the greatest athletes that have ever walked this planet and to be part of a sorority of female athletes. It's something that I treasure more and more as I get older. And I think it's very important to keep that up because so many great female athletes have done so many great things off the field as well and helped advance society. And I think especially in this country, there's an intimate connection between women's sports and advancing human rights and making the world a better place.
Hi, my name is Karensa, Tjoa, and I started synchronized swimming when I was 10 years old. And I made my first national team when I was 17. And so I swam with the USA national team for a few years after that. I represented the US at the Pan American Games in 2015, and then at the 2015 FINA World Championships, and then again at World Championships in 2017. And then I retired after that year because I was also enrolled at UC Berkeley at the time, and I was completing my degree in molecular and cell biology. I was really interested in science and medicine, and with synchronized swimming, I felt like I was being pulled a little bit in two directions and wanted to pursue being a physician scientist. And so right now I am working in research at UCSF. I'm working on leukemia and different therapeutics in cell line models and mouse cancer models. And I'm currently applying to MD PhD programs to become a physician scientist.
Hi, everyone. My name is Latoya Fisher. I'm from the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Excited to be with you all. So I was a basketball player, but I've also played volleyball, softball, volleyball, touch football, intense touch football. And sports has been amazing to me. It's allowed me to travel overseas, allowed me to work in the Middle East for 2.5 years and use basketball to promote peace. Super excited to talk to you about my journey through sports. Today, I currently work in a recreation department as a recreation program supervisor. So again, using sports and just teamwork and the importance of access and resources to give back and help other people get exposed to new opportunities. Can't wait to meet you all.
Hi, I'm Shikha Tandon. I'm a former Olympian swimmer, and I represented India at the 2004 Summer Olympics in Athens. I grew up in India and spent almost 15 years as a competitive swimmer, and then work and education brought me out to the US. I've been here for the past almost 15 years now, and I've worked in the sports industry ever since I graduated from college, first as a science lead at the US Anti-Doping Agency, and then at a few fitness wearable companies in the tech space. And now I'm the director of partnerships at Zechwa, which is Silicon Valley exercise analytics here in the Bay Area.
Hi, my name is Toccara. I am a graduate of Iowa State University, where I was a women's basketball player there. My basketball career has allowed me to travel the world and to disrupt this world in these awesome ways as not only a female athlete, but as a humanitarian, as a philanthropist. And it has allowed me to play 14 amazing years in this career, and I'm able to continue to impact the game that way. Start off as a kid playing soccer, and here I am playing basketball for a living, so I'm grateful. Thank you.
So we will get started. I know you've heard all of their wonderful backgrounds. I know I've spent some time watching some of the videos and the content that they've put out there, and we couldn't be more excited to share this with you. My name is LJ Holmgren. I will be the moderator for today's panel, and we will be talking to a variety of amazing athletes and incredible women. So with us today, we will be going through a few questions about culture, how to balance the school and athletics and that scholar-athlete approach. We'll be looking at societal pressures of sometimes being the first and only and other unfair standards often placed on women, and how to build advocacy between ourselves and others that support us. Male, female, otherwise, we're looking to making sure that we're building support in this world to support women and girls as they pursue their athletic achievements. And then, of course, breaking barriers, how they do it. So let's get started. We'll dive right in. I'll be asking for each of them to share their message on International Women's Day at the end, but let's start with culture. So for Shikha, this is to start with you. I'd love for you to tell us an experience of being an athlete in a culture where women don't play sports? Would you be able to start there?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on this panel and looking forward to the discussion. So just for context, I grew up in India and I swam competitively there for over 15 years and before I moved out to the US. But oftentimes, being in a culture and competing in a culture where women, don't play sports, you find yourself in situations where you're the only woman on the team or the only girl on the team. And I say girl on the team because I've been in this situation ever since I was in my early teens, be it at national camps, be it at, training camps, and even sometimes competing at different international events. And so when you see this happen, it gets a little lonely sometimes. It can get overwhelming. And just as an example, just before the 2008 Olympics, which I was trying to qualify for, the entire Indian team was given the opportunity to go train down in Australia for a few months. And I was the only, woman that got picked for that Indian team. And so the venue that was picked was an all-boys school. So here I am training at an all-boys school. I'm literally the only woman on campus. And, I'm training with a bunch of 20, 30 boys. And, simple things like in between practice sessions where you go back to your room and you're staying, in a place which is completely different than everyone else on the team. And it didn't happen in this situation, but I've had that happen on a number of occasions at national camps and at competitions. So it can get lonely, it can get overwhelming. And how that's really shaped me is that now I work in sports tech, which is a predominantly male-dominated industry. And so now when I enter a room and if I'm one of very few women in the room, it doesn't make me as uncomfortable simply because I've been through that experience. But it also makes me appreciate that journey that I've had. And so now when I look around, I'm trying to actively make attempts to bring more women into the industry, into the room and into the conversations. And some of the ways I'm doing that is by mentoring athletes or just having discussions with students and just showing them what's out there in terms of, career opportunities. And this is just my little way of, bringing people into the room and having, lots of representation.
We learned from your TEDx talk that you were maybe a little shy or quiet growing up, certainly dropping you into that environment, and now has given you tools to handle where you currently are. How do you think you would describe yourself now? So as a little girl, you said you might have been shy or quiet. Do you think you'd still define yourself that way?
In some situations, yes. And this is just a funny thing, but I used to hate interviews. I used to hate panel discussions like this when I was growing up. And so I used to, at every swim meet, wear a t-shirt that said, "I hate questions." And I used to wear that to my interviews. But, I've come a long way since then. And now I'm, open to having these discussions simply because I realize the importance of having these discussions and having different viewpoints shared on all these different topics. So I'm definitely a different person than I was way back when I was a teenager. But, a lot of those experiences have definitely shaped me to who I am today and how I am able to interact in these situations and also bring out my viewpoints.
Wonderful. I mean, the message, the takeaway here is that even being young, shy, and quiet, and maybe this isn't even comfortable, I know I have a little nerves coming into something like this, is that we can all support each other. So I value that you were sharing that experience with us, and certainly how it's helped shape you today. And I'd love to bring Latoya into this conversation as well, of how this has an experience of being an athlete in a culture where women don't play sports, and now you are actually in a place in your recreation role that you help to facilitate children playing in sports. So if you can share your experience with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My experience was a little bit different than Shikha's because I was just kind of like placed in there due to an experience that I chose to pursue. So in my 20s, I ended up teaching English in South Korea. And it was very interesting because I learned early on that they have more traditional rules for men and women. And so sometimes the staff would get together and play volleyball after school, but the net for the women was slightly higher than probably you'd see like at a tennis court. So since I'm about 5'11", it was like maybe barely mid-chest for me. But since I had a volleyball background, I did well when I was playing with the women, and the principal invited me to play with the men. and I was put on the same team as the principal. And they played on more so like a regulation net. And I went into the situation thinking that I was chosen because the men saw how good of an athlete I was, and that they saw me as an equal, and that I was there to play the game like I would, back in the States. But then I quickly learned that I ended up feeling like belittled and more of like a prop, because basically it was all about setting up the principal to look good. So they wouldn't really like pass me the ball, and they were like explaining the rules to me, which I already knew, but and also like how I needed to keep the ball on our side more and like up in the air to set the principal up, so that people could cheer for him. And the like entire experience was just really frustrating, because it was tough, and I wanted to respect the culture, but it was just so different from what I was used to that it seemed a little bit crazy to me. So I got really emotional after the game, and I was talking to my co-teacher, and she just kind of chalked it up to like, it is what it is. But I just found that really hard to accept. But also I wanted to make a good impression. So again, it showed me like the power of sport to bring people together, and like I overcame the language barrier because of sports, and ended up getting me out of teaching some classes because I had to play against other schools. But I also vowed never to let myself feel that way again, and just to make sure that I helped create spaces where all my players saw each other as athletes and just for their athleticism, and take away that traditional role or that less than feeling.
So my follow-up, and you've started to answer it, but I'd almost like you to go a little bit further about how that shapes you and a little bit more of the tangibles of how you support your team. Maybe what do you tell them that we can pass these messages on today? What do you tell your teams?
I mean, for the most part, I tell a lot of the girls that I coach to be fearless, and always post messages about like not knowing boundaries. I always say like, boundaries, we don't know her. Like, I played multiple sports, so I'm always telling them to try new things, to not be afraid to take a little bit of a different path. My path was pretty different in that I went to the corporate world, and then I realized I wanted to work with sports. So I went to school, and I ended up teaching English to get international experience, because I wanted to do something in like nonprofit, where a lot of the people that were in the grad school program I was in, they wanted to be like general managers or work in teams and stuff. But I always wanted to do like that corporate social responsibility piece, which was very different. So to not be afraid to try something different, to not be afraid to take a road less travel, and just don't be afraid to shake things up. And I think seeing that and seeing that from my family has really helped kind of shape me, and not be so nervous that my path looks a little bit less traditional.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I'd love to ask your follow-up question, because I'd like to get some of these questions mixed in, our general questions of what makes you uniquely you.
I think kind of what I mentioned, the fact that I'm not afraid to do things a little bit differently. I think my adaptability, I think that's been really helpful, and just the fact that I'm curious, so I always want to find ways to learn about different cultures, people, or try new things. And I think just the way that I try to create fun, light, welcoming atmospheres. My buddy Chinny here is on the call. So we work off each other well, because we just like to create spaces where people feel like they can be authentically themselves and show up and try new things and not be afraid to be vulnerable.
Feel that. I see a lot of head nods on this panel, so lots of agreement here and support there. I'd like to talk, and we think about you're talking about your time in a school and the scholar athlete model. So Karensa, I'd like to talk to you. So far, if we're keeping track of sports, we have swimming and we have basketball. Karensa, if you'll start with your sport, and you're not the only one in this room that participates in your sport, but if you'll start with your sport, and then I'd like to ask you, really, what's your proudest academic achievement, and how did you balance academics and athletic career?
Hi, thanks, LJ. So yes, I did synchronized swimming. Right now it's called artistic swimming, but I competed in that for about 10 years. And the balance between academics and athletics has always been important to me. My parents, They grew up in small towns in Indonesia, and they were the first ones from their family to come over to the US to get an education. And watching them go through, I mean, wasn't there when they went through school, but I can appreciate how much their education helped them build a better life for our family here. And so that has always been very important to me. I got very lucky because the national team happened to be training in Moraga, California, which is a drive away from UC Berkeley, where I attended school. And so I started, I was driving back and forth between my classes and the pool, and I did that for a while. I had to make compromises in certain areas. So for one semester, I deferred my education as we were preparing to travel to the Pan American Games and World Championships. But then I was able to, kind of go back to school when things at the pool were less intense schedule-wise. And it was frustrating at times, because I felt like I wanted to do more in both school and also at practice. But it was helpful to really try and focus on whatever task was immediately at hand, and also remembering my big picture goals in both academics and swimming.
Thank you. And I'm going to keep it in the pool. I'm actually going to welcome Brenda to the call today. And I'd love to ask the question, one, Brenda, if you can share your sport when we start. And then I'd love to ask you the question on societal pressures. So while the dialogue is shifting, we just heard this balance that Karensa was speaking to, but while the dialogue is shifting, image pressure continues. How do you fight against how we can push back on these pressures and continue to shift the narrative? We see that we're striving for balance, we're striving for inclusiveness and this warm and welcoming nature. It's not always what we get. So can you talk to us a little bit more about image and how that plays into it?
Yes, I think it's a great conversation to be having. And I think the more we can have these conversations and normalize that the ideal image is different, right? There is no one image. I know for me growing up, my body type is different than all of my college teammates, my Olympic teammates. I'm 5'4", not petite. I would say, a little on the chubby side, but still very fit. And I know that was something that coaches talked to me about and made it an issue to have a conversation with me about. And I guess in some ways I'm grateful that I just believed in my, my abilities and skills, that I didn't let it seep into my head too much. But I don't want my daughter to have to, have these conversations with coaches. Like if she's performing, then, let's focus on that. So I think the more we talk about it and we talk to the younger generations just about, look, these things may come up, but there isn't one mold that we all need to fit. And I think there is a larger conversation happening right now with marketing. Like I love all the Dove commercials, right? When they show you all the different body images of women. So I think if we all continue this conversation, it's going to help. I think we're going there, but we're not quite there yet. So it's, normalizing that not everyone is going to look exactly the same. And I guess for me, something that I could do myself, right, is share my story a little more about how, my body, I guess, the way it looked was always something that coaches talked to me about, and was something that another layer that I had to deal with. But yeah, it's normal. I take pride in being different, right? In my breaking that mold.
That's wonderful to hear. I think when we're looking for this, the two pools, and what was your sport, if you don't mind sharing? So
I'm sorry. Yes, I'm a water polo player. I guess retired now, but still play masters. So if you look at the Olympic team,
that gold in London there certainly is something to add to the conversation, and multiple medals supporting with Team USA. But when we think about this, and staying with you and Karensa a little bit, it's really the pressure continues, and you just touched upon it with explaining to coaches who you are. So at first it might have been trying it their way, but maybe to you or Karensa, maybe pushing back when it wasn't going their way, and advocating creating that boundary for yourself. Would either of you like to share a story or a time where you created that boundary and and advocated for yourself?
So synchronized swimming is a sport that unfortunately places a lot of weight on the athlete's appearance. Where they really value very tall, slim bodies. And I think things are starting to change, but as Brenda was saying, we still have a long way to go. We did often work with nutritionists and coaches to help guide us regarding what we ate. And for me, I personally ate differently than a lot of my teammates growing up. You know, coming from an Asian family, I ate a lot of white rice and noodles and tofu and not so much meat. And so the idea of having like chicken breast and broccoli and those types of things didn't work as well with my body and just the way that I wanted to eat. And so I think that's an important thing that we should be talking about more, is like the way that athletes are comfortable eating and what they have traditionally ate like at home. And so I just had to set that boundary and say, you know, I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to choose more tofu and rice and different things that I'm more comfortable eating.
For sharing that experience with us. Brenda, did you have something to add? No? Okay. It's very hard being the first or only. And so I'd love to really start to think about advocacy here and thinking about who your biggest cheerleader is. So Toccara, I'd love to hear from your perspective, who is your biggest cheerleader? And when we think about those cheerleaders, how does that support drive you or push you? And also if you could share your sport at the start of your remarks.
Hi, good afternoon or good evening for some of you. My sport is basketball. I'm a 14-year veteran in the sport, so I've been doing this for quite a while. Thus far, my biggest advocate has been my godfather. And to couple onto that, as a male figure, men in my life, my biggest allies in this sport. I'm like many of us who have been playing basketball for a while. And those of us who have excelled at such a high level, we grew up playing with guys and grew up playing with men, and that's kind of what pushed us to excel in the women's game. So definitely, my godfather has definitely been my best supporter and ally because he pushed me to play at the collegiate level. Yeah, what a little bit more about my story, or what else would you like to know?
Oh, I think starting there, who are your biggest cheerleaders is important. And if they were in front of us, what's one thing you would want them to know about supporting women, or maybe a time where they specifically supported you that really had meaning?
Just from the beginning, I know there's a lot of eyes on this sport, basketball specifically, because it's deemed as a male-dominating sport. But when we have that allyship from the male perspective, it also sheds a light on the women's game. And we can have that conversation. I know recently there was a conversation on Twitter about someone saying something about betting on women and not agreeing with that adage because that involves risk. And so when we have a conversation around how we language our support with women and how we language our support about the game, I do think we should take that narrative out as far as our investment. And there's no risk in the allyship of the women's game and the women's sport of any capacity. So allyship is so essential when it comes to just our game and leveling up. So we talk about this conversation as athletes, we can drop, the pronouns of the men's sport, the women's sport, and just say, hey, we're all athletes. We're all participating in this game and we're investing in it as a group. Because as we all know, when it comes to community, you can't build anything without a village. You can't build anything without community. So that allyship, especially from the men in our lives, is extremely important when it comes to enhancing our game and elevating the game of our specific sport or any sport.
100%. I'm going to loop in Chinny into this conversation as well. When we think about some of the challenges you faced in male-dominated industry, what transferable skills do you use from being an athlete to navigate spaces where there isn't much female representation? Also, if you wouldn't mind sharing your sport.
Absolutely. Hey everyone, my name is Chinny Nwagbo. I am excited and happy and thrilled to be here. My sport is basketball. There's going to be a lot of energy behind this answer, but I want to say a couple things. Latoya, you're amazing. I loved how you were able to transition and create a space for making sure that no one else felt like you felt. I think that's powerful work. Karensa, is that correct? Am I right? Karensa, oh my God, you opened my eyes on just food. I was like, oh my goodness, I never thought about it from a cultural standpoint. I'm Nigerian. And so people saying eat chicken and broccoli is the way to go to be the best athlete, and not being able to turn on that lens, that cultural lens, that maybe everybody doesn't eat chicken and broccoli. Maybe that's not the only way to get to a level of being a great athlete. And then Toccara, to bring it all together, right? By saying that we need that support from men, right? The support from men elevates the game for women. And so for me, in that male-dominated society, some of the core characteristics that I've been able to take from being an athlete into working into this in this culture, in this space, is just determination, right? And believing in myself. Like Toccara, I had a lot of male support in terms of who was supporting me in the role of being this basketball player. That is not supposed to be what women do. But a coach of mine lit this fire in me, and I just knew that anything that I put my mind to, I could do. And I take that to every single aspect of my life. There's nothing you can tell me that I can't do. If I believe in myself and I have the support and I continue to do the work and I have the vision, and it aligns with that purpose and passion, there's nothing that I can't do. So that's one core characteristic that I take: believing in myself, having that indomitable will to succeed, and then just understanding that if we take down that shield of gender, male, woman, whatever, non-binary, everybody is exactly the same. And everything that anyone ever says to you is just an opinion. That's all it is. It's nothing but an opinion. So working in these environments where there's only men, I think of it as, okay, that's their opinion. And those were the opportunities afforded to them. And so once I get into those doors, the next thing is to make sure that I'm bringing women behind me to ensure that they have those same opportunities. I'm building my team. I have the support of the men, but I'm also building my team with qualified women who can also do the work, probably even better than the men that are doing it. So that's another thing that I take from, we had teams that were all girls. And so we know that girls are amazing. They rule the world. So how can we transition that into the work that we do? And another core characteristic is just being kind to myself. Understanding that failure is a part of it. And if you can take the wisdom from that failure and turn it into a lesson and then turn it into a learning, then you'll always be evolving, and you'll always be amazing and great and growing in that space. So that's what I would say would be those core characteristics that I took from being an athlete and I apply to my everyday life.
I appreciate that. And when we think about everyone on this panel, we truly have powerful global citizens. Whether it's Chinny and your work globally right now in the Envoy, whether it's your experience, Latoya, being in an international setting from a US perspective, being international and managing some of these cultural challenges that you may have faced, and then your feelings about them. You may not have disagreed, but you certainly are welcome to have your feelings. So I'd like to bring you back into this, Latoya, and either build on what Chinny said or think about this approach to when we think about this and when we want to be inclusive here, support. So it doesn't necessarily need to be men supporting women, but support overall. So one of the areas of maybe share who your biggest cheerleader is and some thoughts there.
So I would say, yeah, for me, similar to Toccara, it was my dad. He was the one who introduced me to basketball. He was the one who introduced me to sports in general. But I loved his approach because even though he had a pretty successful career as well, he never really pressured me to pursue it. And he was just always very supportive. So, if I wanted to go shoot some extra hoops, he was there. If I didn't, he was also there. And I think he also taught me, to Chinny's point about failure and just pushing yourself to get better. He taught me a lot about constructive criticism when I was really young, because at first, I wasn't a huge fan when he'd be like, well, if you do this, this, and this, and then I'd always have kind of an answer or a rebuttal to that. But then he was like, well, do you know what constructive criticism was? And I was like, no. And so he took the time to explain it to me and explain the purpose of it. And from that point on, it was really important to me. And it's something, to Chinny's point, that I put in different areas of my life. So now I seek that feedback, whereas before, and sometimes like as a collegiate athlete, or once you get up there, like getting that feedback or not being perfect makes you anxious. But you get to a point where you start to seek it and you just want to be a better person, and it helps with your growth in all areas. So you don't necessarily see it as a bad thing.
Latoya, can I add something? Just because Latoya was my former supervisor, and I just want to say this, she is about what she just said. She leans into that. So she was my supervisor. And when I tell you there's no one who's had the best constructive criticism as Latoya has had for me, that is the underlying truth. She just knows how to create a space for me to be who I am. And she is comfortable with me being who I am because she is comfortable with who she is. And so I just want to say that. Thank you, Latoya.
After every comment, feel free, I'll pause. This is a conversation and really for our audience to learn from each of you today. So I welcome that opportunity for each of you to jump on a little bit and add to the conversation. I will stick with this family. So we heard from Toccara before about her godfather and family and some of the male members of her family supporting her. We heard from Latoya that her dad was there. I'd like to move to Laxmi and think about the pressures that sometimes family can put on you. Yes, they are support, but let's talk about family pressure and maybe a situation where you've dealt with that and how you've overcome.
Sure, and thank you for allowing me to be here. It's an honor to be with all of you. I was sort of an interesting bird in that I came to the United States. I'm originally from India. I was born in the south of India in a small town called Guntur, which is in a state called Andhra Pradesh. And I came here when I was 3. So I'm pretty much American, although I still speak my language. But the interesting thing about that generation is as time progressed, we stayed in our parents' era. We stayed in the 60s, 70s, and 80s in the values. But India had progressed, and the people in India were becoming more and more liberal. And my parents were pretty conservative. So it was strange that I got to even play a sport. But the lucky thing for me is my dad was a huge sports fanatic. And I actually think he was a pretty good athlete, but he was extremely poor in India, which is one of the reasons why he came here. And so he never had the opportunity to play anything. And like the other panelists, many of the other panelists, I grew up with boys, playing with boys. I have an older brother, so I used to play with him every day. And I credit him with a lot of my development and support. So I had that great support from men. But one of the things I had to face, and I think it's a combination of both the Indian and American cultures. In India, of course, they want you to do everything and then get married, right? They want you to go to school, figure out what you want to do, doctor, engineer, lawyer, whatever, and then you get married, at least again, in that generation of immigrants. And, that's why I have an MBA, because my parents said, you need to go to grad school, you need to get married. I chose school. And I think, that was kind of tough to deal with because I felt, and as we've all faced that tremendous pressure growing up, and you don't feel like you've really socially grown up maybe, and experiencing other things outside just school and sports, right? So that was pretty tough because it's not just you're excelling at a high level in sports, but you're also expected to do well in education. And that takes a lot of time, right? And so, and the other thing, the other half of that is the American culture. So I grew up in a time, my contemporaries and people that I played against were Jennifer Capriati, Monica Seles, Martina Hingis came on a couple of years after me. These were child prodigies. And so the expectation in that era was if you don't win the US Open by the time you're 16 or 17, you're a loser or you're not successful. And I remember, I had played my first US Open when I was 15, going into my junior year of high school. I played the next year as a senior. And, I got to the second round and many of us that were that young in the national team, the US national team, we didn't do great in that US Open. And there was an article in New York Times saying, is American tennis dead, essentially? So there was this tremendous pressure on kids to excel at such a high level. I think you see that a lot more often in women's sports. Of course, we saw it with the ice skater and the Olympics. And, there's this tremendous fascination, right? With, hey, you're young and you're good. And so I feel that women don't get the time to sort of develop as people as much. And I think there's probably reasons for it culturally as well, in terms of how you look and all that kind of stuff, which I think are negative. But, that was tough for me to deal with. And times have changed, thank God. Now tennis at that time, playing college tennis wasn't necessarily a platform for the pros. And now it is, because people are, women are bigger, stronger, faster, which is awesome, but it also takes time to develop physically. So now they're allowed that time. And if you look at some of the great collegiate tennis players, you have Jen Brady from UCLA, Danielle Collins from UVA. Jen reached the finals of the Australian Open, I think lost to Barty, I think. And then Danielle Collins also, I think, lost in the semis or finals of the Australian Open this year. So that's tremendous. I hope that narrative is shared more. I hope people look at these amazing women as examples, because they're in their 20s and they've been allowed to mature. And by the way, they weren't superstars when they were 14, 15, 16. They were ranked, very middle of the pack, so to speak. So that was difficult for me. And frankly, I crumbled mentally because of that. Because I felt like, if I don't win the US Open, before I go to college, then I must not be that good, which was unfortunate.
That family pressure, you also mentioned being sometimes the first or only woman competing against men, which is where I'm heading. So just keeping track of sports, we have basketball, water polo, women's tennis. We also have swimming and artistic swimming as well. So we have quite a few sports on here. And one of the things I want to talk about is some of you started your career very early competing against boys at the time. I know Shikha has an example here, and so does Brenda. It took Brenda a year and a half to advocate for herself for one of the pieces I saw in order to be able to convince her mom to play. But can you share a little bit more about your experience, Brenda, about competing against boys and how that shaped you later on in your athletic career?
Yes, I would say that it's interesting. So I'm a smaller water polo player, and I think playing against the boys helped me in my long trajectory, right, to the national team, and then competing at that level, because I was already used to playing with people that were way taller than me, that were faster than me, stronger than me. So I think I was forced to be creative. I was forced to think outside of the box early on, and I think that helped me. But I often think about maybe the things that I didn't get that others got when they were playing on an all-girls high school team, right, or weren't playing on the co-ed team. So I think there was definitely some pros and cons to playing high school water polo on the boys team. Some of that is confidence, right? It was always the girls' fault if we didn't win a game. So I think some of my confidence would have been at a different level if I had the opportunity to play on an all girls team. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. Just making sure. So, but I do think that there is some value in 10 and under co-ed and 12 and under co-ed. And I know that is, discussions that are happening right now. I think that it makes you, especially for the girls, to be creative, but I have seen it have negative effects on some girls. So I think if there's great coaching in place, I think there's a pros and cons. So it goes back to who's coaching, who's leading these groups. But just to go back to the allyship part, like my brother was on my high school team, and I think if he wasn't on that team, I think my experience might have been a little different. So I do recognize that privilege I had with my older brother being on the team. He never said, good job or great pass or great shot, but I knew that I was safe on that boys team because my brother and other teammates that I grew up with were on that team. So that definitely helped me thrive in that environment.
I see some head nods here. And I know, Shikha, you had mentioned that you had some experience in this too. Feel free, I welcome this to all of you. Any motivation for the girls that are playing against the boys right now?
I mean, I think I'll just add something to what Brenda said too. I think it's good for the boys, right? Because it exposes them to strong women, strong, examples. And like her, my brother was always there. almost every day. And I ended up playing with a lot of his friends that went on to play collegiate tennis in the United States. And, it's funny, we all keep in touch still, and they've all married very strong women, which I'm really happy about. And so I think that exposure, at a young age, displaces the stereotypes that we have. And so it's not just good for women, it's good for the boys, right? I think it's great. You talk about the greats, you talk about Brenda, you talk about there's a woman in Argentina named Luciana Aymar, who's considered, one of the greatest field hockey players in the world. And there's a great documentary on Netflix about her. And there's a scene where she's going on a bus, every weekend to play with the guys in Argentina. And she sort of credits that to how good she became, right? So I'm all for it. And obviously, there's a point where a lot of guys become stronger and it gets more difficult, but in the early stages of development, I think it's fantastic.
And I agree with what Brenda and Lakshmi said, even for me, just being a part of the team with all the boys, it pushed me to get stronger than I was and, push the boundaries of what I was capable of. And, oftentimes I would be the stronger, physically also in the room with the boys. And so they used to tease me saying, oh, Shikha has the biggest muscles in the room. And I actually had a couple of the boys, walk out of the gym because they said we can't compete with her. And so in some sense, it's motivating because, you're pushing yourself to a point which, may not have been possible otherwise. And so you take it as an opportunity. Like Brenda and Lakshmi said, it helps the boys also because now they're in an environment where whether they realize it or not, they're pushing themselves to, get better than, the girls around them, which at that point they're probably taking as a negative. But it also helps them, have these conversations around what it means to support the women on the team and be a part of just conversations and helping the women through their challenges, because with swimming there's obviously this huge element of puberty, and that's when you're also trying to peak in your sport and make the decisions to stick around in the sport. So having the men and the women and the boys and the girls have these conversations together and go through everything together, I think definitely helps them in the long run, when they go on and have families and are trying to have these conversations at a later stage.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would also say that at the very grassroots level, it creates a space where allyship doesn't have to be a word anymore. It's just a thing that we do. And it's just a thing that we lean into. And so I definitely agree with what Lakshmi and Shikha said in terms of just the advantages of teaching boys. So we always talk about how we are providing these opportunities for girls, but how are we making sure the education behind teaching boys how to be supportive for girls and women's sports is very important as well. So I definitely agree with what you guys have said.
Yeah, and I'll reference one thing, and I don't know if you've all watched King Richard, the movie about Venus and Serena. It's fantastic if you haven't. But one of the things that I took away, one of the major thing I took away from that movie, and I never played against them. They were on they came in right as I was sort of retiring, and they didn't have a lot, but what Oracene and Richard did for their kids is they gave them tremendous self-confidence, especially Richard. And, I always tell people you can have a lot, but if you don't have any self-confidence, you're not going to do much. And the reverse is true. If you have a lot of self-confidence, you don't need a lot of everything else. And that's a perfect example of that because, the scene where she is telling the reporter, yes, I can beat the #1 player in the world is tremendous. And I can only think of Tiger Woods that said something very similar, right? It's just this tremendous confidence in yourself. And I think Shikha and others also mentioned that about, what did sports do for them? And especially competing with boys, how did that help them? But that is really the crux of it for me and why women should play more, why I think more girls should play more, because that is so huge in your development in anything, not just being an athlete, but the battles that you're going to fight after athletics, which are oftentimes a lot harder, right? So I just wanted to add that.
100%. Yep, there you go. You got a couple claps and some finger snaps. When we think about this message, our audience that is going to be hearing this on International Women's Day will hopefully be representative of all different genders and backgrounds. And so the question I have, it's a general question for each of you, and feel free to build on some of the points or comment on them. But really, what message do you want to share on International Women's Day? That's going to be the question. And what I'd like to start with is Karensa. What message do you want to share on International Women's Day from your perspective? And it can tie to a story. We'll accept any answer. There's no judgment here. But if you could start with answering that question for us, and we'll move around the room.
Sure. So I think one of the biggest things that I started to learn during my time as an athlete, and I'm still learning right now, is that it is okay to take up space, both physically and my voice, and using that to help others who are learning these same things and going through some of the difficult things that I've been through. I think I felt growing up that I was supposed to be, quiet and not disrupt any waters, respect my elders, which are all great things and can be great things at times, but that's not the only thing that, women or people are capable of. And so I think that has helped me. And I think one of the other pieces of advice I would like to share is that it's okay to ask for what you need and stand up for yourself, because you are your own biggest advocate and nobody else is going to stand up for you the way that you can. And, the worst thing that anybody can say to you is no, and they usually say yes. And so I think that has been incredibly helpful for me just throughout sport and life in general.
Advocating for yourself. Chinny, I'd like to move down to you. Let's see. What advice do you want to share?
Karensa, that was awesome. I would like to, that's part of mine. I think the biggest thing, especially because there's often not a lot of support for women and girls, but it's growing, it's getting better. And that would just be a delayed goal or delayed ask or request, or something you set for yourself is not an unanswered goal or unanswered request. And so you may not find the support right away when you're doing whatever it is you're doing, but just continue to work at it. Continue to believe in yourself, like Laxmi said, have that confidence. Like Serena said, when the reporter asked her, who would you like to be like when you grow up? She said, I would like to be like Serena when I grow up. Having that type of confidence and understanding that things take time, you will reach your goals, and you have to really just truly believe in yourself. And I think the last thing for being who I am is be bold. Like, go out there and just be, I'm very bold. Be bold and just be bold. That's it, be bold. There is only one you, and you were put on this earth to do something amazing and great. Believe in that purpose, be bold, attack it, and it will be yours. So, yeah.
Shikha, I'm going to ask you, what advice do you want to share on International Women's Day? Same question.
I think just echoing, what's already been said, it's just don't be afraid to, chart your own path or career. And just because something hasn't been done before doesn't mean it can't be done. And what I've also learned is, don't be afraid to revisit something that you didn't enjoy initially. And for me, my swimming journey, when I started off learning to swim, I was extremely scared of the water, and swimming was the last thing on my mind. And, all I wanted to do was just go as far away from the pool as quickly as possible. And then I moved into running. And then on my second visit to swimming, that's when I really started enjoying it. And I've seen that happen multiple times in my career, that, just because I didn't enjoy something in the moment doesn't mean it's something that I'm never going to enjoy, because things change and circumstances change, and something that may not be right for you in that moment, don't discount it forever and ever. Just be open to the idea of opportunities, and in that same train of thought, just be open to coming back to something that you may not have enjoyed initially.
And as a reminder, when you're answering this question, you can share a story too when you think about the advice or where it came from. Toccara, what advice would you like to share?
Also, to echo what a lot of my peers have said, is when it comes to taking up space, it's a privilege to take up space in this body, in the spirit, in this mind. And part of the work that I do is in regards to owning your narrative. So part of showing up as a woman on International Sports Day, just showing up in space, owning your narrative, because you know there's never ever going to be anyone like you. We can have these people that we admire and that we live up to and that give us this courage and this strength to be things, but owning our own narrative is so important because I believe Oprah said it, or maybe even Joel Osteen, as long as you have breath, you have something to give. And that's so important for us here, as far as owning our narrative and telling our truth. Own that, and just like Chinny said, just be bold in that truth. It's so important for us.
You just summed all of it up. I think that was wonderful. I welcome Latoya for you to share your advice.
Yeah, so the biggest message that I want to share today is just that representation and exposure really matter. So I really just hope that people give us the same energy when covering our games and exciting plays happen. Give us good coverage and give us sports that aren't considered mainstream. Give those sports exposure. Make sure we get the same resources to perform well. Let us express ourselves, celebrate our bodies, and let us show our passion however we see fit. You know, sometimes Serena gets put into caricatures and things like that because, you know, it's considered pouting. But if a man did that, like, they show frustration, that's considered passion. So I just really, you know, hope we get to continue to work towards change and getting rid of limitations and barriers.
What advice do you have on International Women's Day?
Are you talking to me? Sorry, you're talking to me?
I'm sorry, Brenda. Brenda, what advice do you have on International Women's Day?
I echo everything that has been said, the representation piece. I was nodding my head because yes, right? We all, like, water polo, I laugh because it's like the country club clap, like 3 claps, but like my club team was always so loud and passionate about cheering for games that they were always, you know, looked at a little with the side eye, right? Like, why are they cheering so loud? But yes, totally agree with everything that's being said. Something that I want to share is just dream out loud. Build your support system. Like, without your support system, your road is so much harder. And if I didn't dream out loud, how would I have known that my, you know, immigrant parents that had never heard of the sport of water polo, like, how would they have known that they were going to support me, like, at whatever cost? Like, that my mom was going to allow her daughter to play co-ed sports. She never played sports. So because I was able at an early age to tell her what I was dreaming about, she was able to jump on and be like, I don't know anything about this, but if you want to do this, I'm going to support you. So dream out loud, bring in your teachers, bring in anybody in your community, because people want to see you succeed. But if we don't know what you want to succeed at, how can we help you? So just let us know. And there's more support than you think there is.
Laxmi, you are our last one to answer this question.
Yeah, I mean,
of your advice.
Yeah, all terrific answers from some people that have achieved, you know, amazing things. I think one thing I'll add to it is, you know, I'm probably older than everyone on the panel here. And I've realized as I've grown older that, you know, there's such an intimate connection between great women athletes and the advancement of humankind, really, right? You talk about human rights, you talk about, you know, equal pay, whatever. A lot of it has been possible because of women athletes, great women athletes. And, you know, when I hear about people like Ons Jabeur, who's the first Muslim woman to be in the top 10 in the world in tennis, she's, in my opinion, the most exciting tennis player out there, actually. She's just amazing to watch, so creative, so beautiful to watch. I think it's a win for us all, right? And so I guess my advice is cheer for each other. You know, we sometimes grow up in environments where women are really competing, and competition's great, and it's going to bring great things out of individuals. But, you know, we should also support each other and cheer for each other when we're out there, because it is lonely, as some of you have pointed out. And especially in these countries and cultures where, you know, outside of the US, where they don't get the support and they don't get the accolades, you know, when I was growing up, and Shikha would know who this person is, the only frame of reference I had was an Olympic runner named P.T. Usha, and she was 4th in the Olympics, which is a tremendous achievement. She missed by half a second, missed a medal. And, you know, she didn't get nearly the press or the support as all the cricketers. And so despite achieving such a great thing. And so I think, my advice would be to support each other and cheer for each other wherever you are in the world, because it is a win for us all when someone does something.
Lakshmi, if I could add on to that, because I think it's amazing, I would also say that there's space for everybody to be successful. I think oftentimes women don't cheer for each other women because they think it's only one slot for that one woman to do that one thing. So if we're gonna cheer all the way, right? And cheer and understanding that by me cheering for you, it doesn't take away from my blessing. Or me lifting you up, it doesn't take away from my platform or the greatness that I'm gonna do. We can be great together because there's enough space and room for all of us to be there. So I wanna say
absolutely.
Yeah, I'll agree. I'll say that I started to kind of change my mindset in high school. I always thought in order to be in order to get better and you had to be passionate, you had to go out and you had to get angry when you didn't do well. But once my coach was fix your attitude, because she knew that wasn't me. Usually I'm light and happy. So, I was okay, well, I don't want to be around that energy. And then I thought what it was like to be around me. So then, I found other ways to contribute to the team. So I started being the loudest to cheer. When I was on the bench, you got to find those other ways to contribute. And it became really important to me to start really cheering for my team. And a lot of people talk about it's bigger than you. And I think, Laxmi, to your point, that's exactly it. It's always going to be bigger than us. So I think, yeah, cheering for everyone and enough room for everyone is 100% on point.
What I heard from these last few comments were, one, to take up space, which is wonderful, but also make space for others. And I think when you're making that space, and each of you have highlighted it, it makes room for one more, or 5 more, or 100 more after you. And so when I hear each of you speak your truth today and what makes you uniquely you, some of that boldness comes through. When I think of support, being the first and the only, those can place a lot of pressure on you. So we are wrapping up our time. We're nearing the end. We have more time at the end for other questions. But as we think about this concept of supporting others, what makes you uniquely you, what obstacles do you have to work through, those are all part of each of our journeys. So I welcome from each of you, and I know in Zoom world it gets a little awkward as to who goes, but any final remarks, any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
Just, saying that when you're in your situation, going through your journey, you have your own set of goals. And, sometimes we achieve them and sometimes we don't. And even if when we don't realize it then, but we've inspired so many more just from, attempting to do what we've done. And I've seen that happen. I've been inspired by people, who've attempted to do things before me. And I'm hoping that, my little journey has inspired someone else. And I think that's what, if we can all strive for that and acknowledge that and appreciate that everything that we do today is going to help someone down the road, I think that just makes our contribution, just so much more meaningful.
Well, ladies, I think we've done it. You've done an incredible job today of supporting each other, of supporting the future of sports, whether removing that gender label, really pushing this forward, making space for all is really our goal here today. When we think about the purpose of the panel, it's really how you've overcome some of your own obstacles to get here, and honestly owning your unique value proposition, what exists here. I want to thank each of you for your time today. Of course, when we think about why this is all possible, Athlete Soul, and of course, Miriam setting this up, with a special thanks to Nina, who makes sure that all of this runs so smoothly. We greatly appreciate each of your time and effort that has gone into preparing, listening, and supporting each other through this hour-long conversation. We welcome to all of the celebrations on International Women's Day, and we celebrate you. Thank you so much. Have a great day.